The wind carried the scent of damp earth and unfamiliar flora as Isel walked cautiously beside her human guide, her elongated fingers twitching at her sides. Her kind, the Kalari, were not accustomed to this kind of terrain, uneven, untamed, bursting with chaotic life. The colony was a strange place, filled with creatures that defied the order her people upheld. She had come here to learn, to observe the ways of these unpredictable beings called humans, but already she felt the slow creep of unease coiling around her throat. The human beside her, Daniel, had assured her that nothing in this sector of the settlement posed a danger to her. She found little comfort in his words. Humans, after all, had a peculiar way of defining danger. They thrived in environments that would drive other species to extinction, adapted to hardships as though discomfort was merely an invitation to evolve. A sudden rustling in the undergrowth made Isel halt, her bioluminescent skin flaring in sharp warning. Daniel took another step forward before he noticed her hesitation. He followed her gaze, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Ah," he said, "you're about to meet Rex." Before Isel could inquire, the creature emerged. It was massive, four-legged, thick-muscled, and covered in coarse fur the color of burnt sand. It moved with a predator's ease, its mouth slightly parted to reveal gleaming, unnervingly sharp teeth. A low, rumbling sound erupted from its throat. Isel felt her body lock in place, her instincts screaming to retreat, to flee from the obvious threat. "Daniel," she hissed, taking a step back. "That thing, it's hunting us." The human laughed, a deep, amused sound, and crouched low as the beast barreled toward them. Instead of attacking, it leapt at Daniel with reckless enthusiasm, placing its massive paws against his chest, knocking him slightly off balance. The human merely grunted, running a hand through the creature's fur as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "He's not hunting," Daniel said, ruffling the beast's head. "He's greeting." Isel barely heard him. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she took in the creature's gleaming fangs, the predatory glint in its dark eyes. The thing emitted another low sound, rhythmic, almost guttural. She recognized it then, not as a growl of warning, but of something else entirely. Laughter. The beast was laughing. Daniel gestured toward her, his expression expectant. "Come on, he's curious. Let him say hello." "Hello." Isel's voice sharpened. "That is not a greeting. That is the display of a dominant carnivore preparing to assert control over its territory." Daniel chuckled. Yeah, I guess you could see it that way. But really, he's just excited." The creature turned its gaze on her then, and she stiffened. Its eyes, though dark, were strikingly intelligent, assessing her with unnerving focus. It lowered itself slightly, ears twitching forward, tail flicking once in the air behind it. Isel recognized the behavior. It was studying her response, reading her body language, testing her. A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy with tension. "Don't run," Daniel said softly. She bristled. "I was not planning to." "Good," he said, scratching the creature under its chin. "Because if you run, he'll think you want to play." "Play." Isel struggled to make sense of the word in this context. On her world, creatures did not engage in play, not in the way humans described it. The concept of recreation, of joyful, purposeless movement, was foreign to the Kalari. Play was for juveniles, for lesser beings who had yet to grasp survival's rigid laws. And yet, here was this beast, this massive, fanged predator, standing before her, its entire body radiating expectation, tail wagging, eager to interact not as an enemy, but as something else. Daniel stood, placing a hand on the creature's head. "His name is Rex. He's a dog." Isel swallowed, her throat tight. "A dog? Yeah, he's my companion. My friend." She stared at him, waiting for the jest, the inevitable clarification that this was some elaborate human joke. None came. Instead, Daniel spoke as though it were the most obvious thing in the universe, as though the words themselves required no further explanation. "You keep a predator as a friend?" The phrase tasted wrong in her mouth. "You willingly coexist with a creature that could tear the flesh from your bones?" Daniel shrugged. "Yeah, I mean, technically, but he wouldn't. He's domesticated, trained. He loves people. Loves, she echoed, stunned. It is a lesser life form. That doesn't mean it doesn't feel things. Daniel scratched behind Rex's ear, and the beast closed its eyes, sighing in contentment. We've lived with dogs for thousands of years. They protect us, work with us, stay by our sides no matter what. In return, we take care of them. It's a bond, one of the oldest we have. Isel struggled to process this revelation. Her people did not bond with lesser species. They either ignored them or eradicated them, depending on whether they posed a threat. Coexistence was not an option. And yet, before her stood a human, treating this monster as if it were a trusted ally, a cherished companion. The very idea defied reason. The dog, Rex, took a slow step toward her. Isel froze, instincts warring with logic. Daniel, sensing her hesitation, extended a hand. Try touching him, he suggested. Just lightly. He won't hurt you. She recoiled. I will not. Why not? He is unpredictable. Dangerous. Daniel tilted his head. So am I. And yet, you're here, trusting me. The word struck her harder than she expected. Trust. Was that what this was about? Humans trusted creatures that should, by all logic, remain threats. Was that not folly? Or was it something else? Something she had yet to understand? Rex, still waiting, let out a quiet huff before stepping back, as if sensing her hesitation and choosing to give her space. She watched in fascination. A creature that recognized boundaries. A creature that did not take without permission. Daniel smiled, as though he knew exactly what she was thinking. You don't have to pet him today, but maybe tomorrow. She wasn't sure if tomorrow would change anything. But as she walked away, she found that the image of the dog, standing there, waiting, not as a monster, but as something else, lingered in her mind longer than she expected. Isel had spent the night replaying the encounter in her mind, dissecting every moment with meticulous precision. The way the dog had moved, its posture, the strange gleam of intelligence in its eyes. It unsettled her. More than that, it fascinated her. She had expected hostility, a mindless creature ruled by instinct, but what she had seen was something else entirely. Restraint. Awareness. A creature waiting for her acceptance rather than demanding it. And yet, the fear remained. When Daniel suggested they visit a training facility where dogs worked alongside humans, she agreed with careful reluctance. She told herself it was merely for study, for observation. It was her duty to understand, after all, to unravel the logic of human behavior, no matter how perplexing it was. The facility was unlike anything she had seen before. It was an open expanse of land, bordered by steel fencing and humming with controlled activity. Humans moved with precision, issuing commands in firm but calm voices. The dogs responded with uncanny discipline, following instructions with seamless coordination. Some wore harnesses, others trotted alongside their handlers with quiet focus. Isel observed from a safe distance, noting the variation in their forms, some large and broad-shouldered, others lean and agile. The idea of so many predators working in unison should have been terrifying, yet there was an order to it, a balance. Daniel gestured toward a pair of dogs sitting patiently beside a uniformed human. These guys are trained to detect explosives. They can smell things we'd never pick up on, save lives just by existing. Isel watched as the human gave a signal, and one of the dogs immediately lowered its nose to the ground, weaving through a set of crates with measured precision. Within moments, it stopped, pressing a paw against a specific container. The handler stepped forward, inspecting the marked crate before nodding in approval. The dog's tail wagged as if it understood the importance of what it had just done. She exhaled slowly. And if it had been real, Daniel shrugged, then that dog would have just prevented a disaster. It was not an answer she had expected. A predator preventing harm. She had spent her entire life viewing creatures like these as nothing more than threats to be neutralized. The idea that they could serve a purpose beyond violence rattled something deep within her. She turned to Daniel. And yet, you claim to keep them as companions as well. Why? If they serve such crucial roles, why allow them to be distractions? They're not distractions, Daniel said, smiling. They're family. They protect us, we protect them. It's not just about utility, it's about loyalty. Loyalty. The word landed heavily between them. Isel knew loyalty, but only in the sense of duty, of obligation. To choose to be loyal to something lesser, something inherently dangerous. It was a concept that should have been illogical. Before she could respond, a commotion broke out across the yard. One of the handlers shouted as a young, untrained dog broke free from its tether, bolting toward the field. Its gait was erratic, its energy unfocused, but its intent was clear. It was running straight toward her. Isel's body reacted before her mind could catch up, her muscles tensing, every instinct screaming at her to retreat. The dog was smaller than Rex, but its approach felt no less threatening. Her hands twitched at her sides, ready to deploy the defensive warning signals ingrained into her physiology. "Hold still," Daniel said sharply. "Don't run. He's just overexcited." Her breath caught in her throat, her limbs locked in place. The dog skidded to a stop just inches away, its tail a frantic blur. It stared up at her with wide, eager eyes, panting lightly. No aggression, no threat, just boundless, uninhibited curiosity. Slowly, cautiously, she exhaled. The handler rushed forward, grabbing the dog by its harness and pulling it back with an apologetic nod. "Sorry about that. Pup's still in training. He gets excited around new people." Isel barely registered the words. Her pulse was still pounding, but something strange had settled in her chest. The dog had not attacked. It had not sought to dominate. It had simply wanted to be near her. Daniel studied her face carefully. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I expected something different." He grinned. "Yeah, I figured. But that's kind of the point, isn't it?" The rest of the day passed in slow, thoughtful silence. Isel observed as the dogs worked, as they trained, as they interacted with their handlers with a level of trust she had never thought possible. She watched as they responded not just to commands, but to emotion, comforting when comfort was needed, guarding when danger was sensed. They were not mindless beasts. They were something more. That night, as she sat outside the human compound, she found herself replaying the moment in her mind. The rush of adrenaline, the expectation of violence that had never come. She clenched her fingers, unsettled by the realization that had begun to take root. She had been wrong. A rustling sound pulled her from her thoughts. She turned sharply, her muscles tensing, only to see Rex padding toward her, his gait unhurried, his posture relaxed. He stopped a few feet away, watching her. He did not move closer. He did not force his presence upon her. He simply waited. For the first time, she saw the patience in his eyes. The same patience she had seen in the handlers, in the trainers, in Daniel. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out. Her fingers brushed against thick fur, coarse but warm. Rex remained still, allowing her to explore the sensation. It was nothing like she had expected. It was pleasant. A quiet huff of air left the dog's nose, and Isel withdrew her hand, staring at him in something dangerously close to awe. Daniel's voice drifted through the night air, carrying an unmistakable note of satisfaction. "See? Not so bad, right?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Rex, at the creature she had once called a monster. And for the first time, she was no longer certain that was true. The night was still, broken only by the occasional rustling of wind through the alien foliage. Isel sat on the steps outside the human compound, her hands clasped together as she gazed upward at the unfamiliar sky. The constellations were different here, the arrangement of stars foreign, yet she found herself less focused on the heavens than on the creature resting beside her. Rex lay sprawled out, his large frame taking up more space than seemed necessary. His breathing was steady, his body language utterly relaxed. The first time she had seen him, she had believed him to be a monster. Now, she wasn't sure what she saw. She flexed her fingers absently, still remembering the sensation of his fur beneath her touch. It had taken days for her to find the courage to reach out, to move past her deeply ingrained fear. Even now, she felt a quiet tension in her chest, a wariness that had not yet faded. But there was something else too, something that unsettled her even more. Curiosity. You're thinking too hard again. Daniel's voice was light with amusement as he stepped outside, crossing the short distance to sit beside her. She did not look at him, still watching Rex as his tail gave a single, lazy thump against the ground. This is an adjustment. Daniel chuckled, stretching his arms over his head. Yeah, I figured. You're getting there, though. She tilted her head slightly, considering. My people do not form bonds with lesser species. The very idea of it is unnatural. You keep saying that. Daniel leaned back against the step, his expression thoughtful. But it doesn't seem like you actually believe it anymore. Isel exhaled slowly. She did not know what she believed anymore. Everything she had been taught told her that creatures like Rex were meant to be controlled, contained, or eliminated. And yet, time and again, she had witnessed something different, something that defied the rigid logic of her people. Do you remember what you told me about your homeworld? Daniel asked, breaking the silence. How everything is structured. How every species has its place, its role. She nodded. That structure ensures survival. Sure, maybe, but it also means you don't let anything change. You don't give anything the chance to be more than what it was born as. He scratched behind Rex's ear absent-mindedly, earning a pleased huff from the dog. If we thought that way, we never would have made it. We had to adapt, to take risks. And sometimes, that meant trusting creatures we didn't fully understand. She turned her gaze to him, studying his face. And that is why you bonded with them? It's part of it. He gave a small shrug. But honestly, we didn't just take them in. They chose us too. It wasn't one-sided. That's what makes it different. Isel considered his words carefully. The idea of a lesser species choosing to align itself with a more advanced one voluntarily was difficult to comprehend. Among the Kalari, hierarchy was absolute. There were no choices, only assigned roles. But here, there was something else at play, something intangible yet undeniable. Rex shifted, rolling onto his side with a heavy sigh, his tail curling slightly toward her. The gesture was small, barely noticeable, yet it sent a strange warmth through her. He trusted her now, even after her initial fear, her hesitation. Despite everything, he had offered her patience, acceptance. Without fully realizing it, she reached out again, her fingers threading through his fur. The motion was easier this time, less forced. Rex made a contented sound, his breathing deep and even. She did not flinch. She did not retreat. Daniel smiled. See? You get it now. She did not answer immediately. Her mind was still trying to reconcile what she felt with what she had always believed. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. Perhaps my people have been wrong about some things. Daniel let out a low chuckle. Now that's progress. She allowed herself a small, thoughtful smile. It was a terrifying thought, the idea that the universe was not as rigid as she had once believed. But for the first time, she wondered if that might not be such a bad thing.